Hello everyone, Detective Frost here. Welcome back to the True Crime series, The Cold Files. File number 03A, The Lighthouse Where Three Men Went Silent. On the afternoon of December 26, 1900, a relief ship called the Hesperus approached the Flannan Isles, a remote group of islands off the west coast of Scotland. Ahead of it stood the Lighthouse on Eilean Moor, a tower built to guide ships through dangerous water, a place that existed for one clear purpose: to keep a light burning when the sea turned dark. But as the ship came closer, something felt wrong. The horn sounded across the water. A signal rocket was fired into the cold air. The crew waited for movement on the island, for a figure at the landing place, for any sign that the men inside had heard them coming. There was no answer. The lighthouse itself was still standing. The buildings had not vanished. The island had not been destroyed. But the three men assigned to the station, James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur, were nowhere to be seen. These were not careless men. They were experienced lighthouse keepers, used to isolation, rough weather, strict routines, and the quiet pressure of working in a place where mistakes could cost lives. Their job was not only to keep the lamp lit, but to maintain the equipment, record the weather, watch the sea, and wait for the next relief crew to arrive. One of those relief keepers, Joseph Moore, was on the Hesperus that day. He expected to find his colleagues ready to hand over the station. Instead, he was about to step onto an island that felt too still. At first, there was no obvious sign of violence, no clear explanation waiting at the door, and no one there to answer the simplest question. How could three lighthouse keepers disappear from one of the most isolated workplaces in Britain, leaving behind a place that seemed less like a crime scene than a silence no one knew how to read? To understand why that silence became so disturbing, we have to go back to the days before the Hesperus reached the island. On the night of December 15th, more than a week before the Hesperus reached Eilean Moor, the first warning may have already passed through the darkness. Around midnight, a steamship traveling near the Flannan Isles reportedly noticed something that should not have been possible. The lighthouse was dark. For sailors in that part of the Atlantic, the light on Eilean Moor was not just a distant glow. It was a signal of position, safety, and human presence. If the lamp was out, then something had gone wrong. The report was made when the vessel reached port, but according to later accounts, the information did not reach the Northern Lighthouse Board in time. So for days, the island remained alone. Then, on December 26th, the Hesperus arrived for the scheduled relief. What should have been a routine changeover immediately became strange. No keeper came down to meet the boat. No one answered the horn. No one appeared after the signal rocket was fired. Joseph Moore, the relief keeper, was sent ashore to find out why. As he climbed toward the lighthouse, the silence would have been hard to ignore. This was not a place where people could simply wander away unnoticed. Eilean Moor was isolated, exposed, and surrounded by dangerous water. The men stationed there lived by routine, because routine was what kept the station functioning. When Moore reached the lighthouse, he found no immediate sign of a violent break-in. Inside, the rooms did not look like the aftermath of a clear attack. The lamp had been prepared. The lens and machinery had been cleaned. The kitchen was orderly. The station looked in many ways as if work had been interrupted rather than abandoned. And yet James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur were gone. The most unsettling part was not what had been destroyed. It was what had been left almost perfectly in place. At first, that order made the scene difficult to understand. If the men had panicked, why did the station seem so controlled? If someone had forced their way inside, where were the signs of a struggle? If the keepers had left voluntarily, why would all three of them leave the lighthouse unattended? Then investigators began to notice the details that mattered. 2 sets of outdoor clothing were missing. That suggested that at least 2 of the men had gone outside. In a lighthouse station surrounded by rough weather and steep rock, this was not a small detail. Outdoor clothing meant exposure. It meant work outside the safety of the tower. It meant that something may have pulled them toward the open island, but it also raised another question. If only 2 sets were missing, what happened to the third man? Was he still inside at first? Did he leave later? Did all 3 go out together, with one of them leaving without full protection? The evidence could suggest possibilities, but it could not give a clean answer. The logbook added another layer of uncertainty. The final completed entries were from December 13th, while information for December 14th and the morning of December 15th had reportedly been written on a slate, ready to be transferred into the official log. The morning work on the 15th appeared to have been completed. That detail mattered because it narrowed the likely window. It suggested the men may have vanished sometime after their normal duties on the morning of December 15th. The logbook did not scream danger. In a way, that made it more disturbing. It recorded routine details, weather, light, work completed, but not the moment when routine turned into disaster. Over time, the Flannan Isles story became surrounded by darker legends. Some versions describe strange log entries, keepers weeping, praying, or reacting to an unnatural storm. But many researchers have pointed out that these dramatic entries do not appear to be supported by the original official records. They seem to belong more to later retellings than to the documented case. And that is important, because the real mystery does not need a supernatural diary to be disturbing. The real mystery is quieter. 3 trained men were at their post. Their work appeared to be done. Then something drew them out of the lighthouse, and no one was there to write down what happened next. To understand what may have happened, investigators had to stop looking at the empty rooms and start looking at what the sea had left behind. Outside, especially near the western landing, there were signs of damage. Equipment had been disturbed. Areas connected to landing and securing supplies appeared to have been affected by heavy seas. The sea around Eilean Moor could rise violently, and in bad conditions, waves could reach places that might have seemed safe moments earlier. This is where the official explanation began to form. Investigators later believed that the men may have gone outside to check damage, secure equipment, or respond to conditions near the landing place. If a powerful wave struck suddenly, it could have swept them from the rocks before they had time to return to the lighthouse. It was a practical explanation, and in many ways, it fit the evidence. The light had likely gone out around December 15th. The station was empty when the Hesperus arrived. The interior was orderly. Outdoor clothing was missing. The morning work appeared complete. Damage was found outside, near areas exposed to the sea. And there were no bodies, no witnesses, and no clear evidence of a crime. But an explanation is not the same as closure. For the families of James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur, the sea gave back no final answer. There was no burial in the ordinary sense, no last confirmed moment, no account from the men themselves. They were considered lost, but the exact sequence of their final minutes remained unknown. The case also left a mark on the lighthouse service itself. It became one of the most enduring mysteries in Scottish lighthouse history, not because it proves something impossible happened, but because it shows how fragile human certainty becomes in a place so isolated. These men worked in conditions where communication was limited, help was distant, and the weather could change the meaning of every decision. No one was arrested, no trial followed, no criminal conclusion was established. Officially, the case leaned toward accident, a tragic encounter with weather and sea. But several questions remained. Who left the lighthouse first? Why did the third man leave? What exactly happened at the western landing? And if a wave did take them, why did it leave behind only enough evidence to suggest the truth, but never enough to fully prove it? In official terms, the case leaned toward accident. In human terms, it remained a disappearance without a goodbye. What makes the Flannan Isles case so difficult to forget is not only that 3 men disappeared, but that the warning came quietly. A light was out, a ship noticed, a report was made, and still, by the time anyone reached the island, whatever had happened was already beyond recovery. The smallest details became the heaviest ones. The missing outdoor clothing, the unfinished transfer from slate to logbook, the damage near the western landing. None of them proved the final moment, but together, they pointed toward a dangerous possibility, that the men stepped outside for something ordinary, something connected to their work, and never made it back. That is why the case still lives in the space between evidence and silence. The sea remains the most widely accepted explanation, but reason does not always feel like an answer when there are no witnesses, no bodies, and no final entry written by the men themselves. More than a century later, the lighthouse still stands, but the silence of December 1900 has never fully lifted. 3 men went there to keep a light burning, and somehow, the light went out before anyone knew they were gone. At Flannan Isles, the warning was a missing light, noticed too late, understood only after the men were gone. But not every disappearance begins with silence. Sometimes, the final warning is spoken in real time, carried through a radio signal, with someone on the other end listening but unable to help. Decades later, over the dark waters of Bass Strait, a young pilot would report something above his aircraft, and after that, the record would fall silent. File number 03B, the pilot who reported something above him. At 7:06 p.m. on October 21, 1978, a young pilot flying over the dark water of Bass Strait asked Melbourne Flight Service a question that should have had a simple answer. Was there any known traffic below 5,000 feet? From the ground, the answer came back: no known traffic in the area. But Frederick Valentich was not asking out of curiosity. He was alone in a Cessna 182L, registration VHDSJ, flying at night from Moorabbin Airport near Melbourne toward King Island. Below him was open water, around him was darkness, and above him, he believed something was moving. Valentich was 20 years old. He was not a veteran commercial pilot with decades in the air. He was a young man still building his experience, still chasing the future he wanted in aviation. To reduce him to the pilot who saw a UFO is too simple. He was a real person, with ambitions, training, limitations, and a voice that would soon become the most haunting part of this case. At first, there was nothing about the flight plan that sounded impossible. It was a night VMC flight, planned under conditions where visibility should allow a pilot to navigate by sight. The route from Moorabbin to King Island crossed more than 200 kilometers of sea, a lonely stretch where the horizon can blur, lights can mislead, and distance can become difficult to judge. Then Valentich began describing something he could not identify. He said it had bright lights. He said it seemed to be above him. He said it was moving in a way that did not make sense to him. And within minutes, the radio transmission ended. No confirmed wreckage was recovered during the search. No confirmed final position could explain everything. No one could say, with certainty, what Frederick Valentich saw in those last moments. For most of the flight, nothing about the plan sounded impossible, until Valentich asked whether another aircraft was near him. At 6:19 p.m., Frederick Valentich departed Moorabbin Airport in a Cessna 182L, registration VHDSJ, bound for King Island. According to aviation records summarized from the investigation, the aircraft had been refueled and had enough endurance for several hours in the air. On paper, the flight was not supposed to be extraordinary. It was a night flight across Bass Strait, over dark water, toward a known destination. At around 7 p.m., Valentich reported passing Cape Otway. For a while, the flight still seemed to fit within a normal sequence: departure, position report, route across the strait, arrival expected later that evening. There was no emergency call at first, no report of immediate danger, no indication that the aircraft was already in trouble. Then, at about 7:06 p.m., Valentich contacted Melbourne Flight Service and asked whether there was any known traffic below 5,000 feet. The reply was simple: there was no known traffic in the area. That answer should have ended the question. Instead, it opened the part of the case that would make this disappearance famous. Valentich began describing an aircraft, or object, above him. He said it appeared to be large. He described bright lights. He seemed uncertain about its speed, its type, and its movement. At one point, he reported that it was orbiting above him, as though circling his aircraft. The strange part was not only that Valentich saw something, it was that the official voice on the other end could not confirm anything was there. For Melbourne Flight Service, the situation was difficult to interpret. A pilot was reporting traffic where no known traffic was expected. He was trying to describe something in real time, but his descriptions did not produce a clear identification. The exchange became less like a standard traffic report and more like a final attempt to understand something that neither side could verify. Then Valentich reported that his engine was running roughly. That detail changed the tone of the call. Until then, the mystery centered on what he believed he was seeing outside the aircraft. Now there was also the possibility of a mechanical issue, or a pilot under stress, or a developing emergency that could not be fully heard from the ground. When asked to identify the object, Valentich gave the line that would stay with the case for decades. In essence, he said it was not an aircraft. The final transmission came at around 7:12 p.m. After that, there was no clear explanation, no confirmed emergency message, and no further contact. The radio did not give investigators an answer. it left them with the last puzzle. Every theory about Valentich begins in the same place, with a young pilot trying to describe something he could not identify. But the radio exchange has also been easy to misunderstand. In public memory, the case is often reduced to the word UFO, but investigators and aviation researchers had to look at more ordinary possibilities as well. Not because they were less interesting, but because they were more grounded in what can happen to a pilot at night over open water. Before those possibilities can be considered, it is important to hold both things together. Valentich did report something he could not identify, and at the same time, the conditions of the flight created real risks that do not require a supernatural explanation. Bass Strait offered few visual references. In darkness, the sea and sky can blend together. The horizon can become unclear. Lights can appear farther away, closer, higher, or lower than they really are. A pilot with limited experience can become disoriented, especially if attention is fixed on something outside the cockpit. There were also possible explanations involving bright celestial objects. Some later analysis noted that Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and the star Antares were visible that night, and may have appeared in a pattern that could be misread under the right conditions. That does not prove what Valentich saw, but it shows how the sky itself can become misleading when a person is already uncertain. Once the radio fell silent, the mystery moved from the sky to the sea. After contact was lost, search and rescue procedures were activated. According to reports, an alert phase began shortly after the final transmission, and when the aircraft failed to arrive at King Island, the situation escalated. Searchers looked from the air, from the sea, and across relevant land areas. The search continued for days, but they found no confirmed trace of Frederick Valentich and no confirmed wreckage of the Cessna that could explain what had happened. That absence became one of the most important facts in the case. If the aircraft had been recovered, investigators might have been able to examine the engine, fuel system, instruments, impact angle, or structural damage. They might have been able to determine whether the engine problem was real, whether the aircraft entered the water under control, or whether something failed in flight. But without the aircraft, every explanation had a missing center. The UFO theory remained popular because it seemed to match Valentich's final words. The theory of spatial disorientation also remained possible because the conditions fit a known aviation risk, night flying over water, with limited visual cues. Mechanical trouble could not be ruled out either, especially because Valentich reported rough running before the transmission ended. Other personal explanations have been mentioned over the years, but there is no firm evidence strong enough to present them as conclusions. Years later, a piece of an engine cowl flap washed up on Flinders Island. It was identified as belonging to a type and serial range of Cessna 182 that could have included Valentich's aircraft, but even that did not close the case. It was suggestive, not definitive. The search ended, but the story did not, because the one thing investigators needed most was the one thing the sea never gave back. What is known is that Frederick Valentich took off from Moorabbin in VHDSJ, contacted Melbourne Flight Service, reported something he could not identify, mentioned engine trouble, and then disappeared. Air traffic control could not confirm matching traffic nearby. The aircraft never reached King Island. The searches did not recover him or the plane. What remains uncertain is almost everything after the final radio call. Did he see another aircraft, celestial lights, or something he misread in the dark? Did he become spatially disoriented while trying to watch the object? Did the aircraft suffer a real mechanical failure? Or did several small factors combine in the worst possible order? In official terms, it became an unresolved disappearance. In human terms, it became a final radio call with no one left to explain it. What makes the Valentich case so difficult to set aside is the way one final radio exchange reshaped everything that came after it. Without those last words, this might have been remembered as a tragic night flight over water, an aircraft lost in darkness, and a pilot who never reached his destination. But because Valentich described something above him, the disappearance became something larger, stranger, and harder to separate from legend. That final detail did not solve the case. It complicated it. The radio captured uncertainty in real time, a young pilot trying to explain what he believed he was seeing, while the people on the ground could not confirm it, identify it, or guide him away from it. A reasonable explanation may exist in disorientation, distraction, misleading lights, mechanical trouble, or some combination of them. But without the aircraft, reason can only go so far. Frederick Valentich's final report may never be fully explained, not because there are no theories, but because the evidence ended where the radio did. If this was a simple accident, the last transmission made it unforgettable. If it was something else, the proof never came back from the sea. In Valentich's case, the mystery survived because the final voice on the radio left more questions than answers. But sometimes, the most important clue is not a voice at all. It is a written instruction, strange enough to feel like a warning only after everything is over. In Brazil, 2 electronics technicians would climb a hill near Niterói, carrying raincoats, a bottle of water, and something they believed they needed to wait for. File number 03C. The hill where 2 men waited for a signal. On a hill outside Niterói, in August of 1966, 2 men were found lying side by side, dressed as if they had arrived for an appointment. They were not in work clothes, they were wearing suits. Over them were raincoats, as though they had prepared for weather, or for something that required them to wait outdoors. There were no obvious signs of violence at the scene, no clear evidence of a struggle, and no immediate explanation for why they had come to Morro do Vintém. But beside them were objects that made the scene almost impossible to read. Lead masks, a bottle of water, and a small note with instructions that sounded less like a message left behind and more like a schedule someone intended to follow. For decades, people would focus on the strangest lines: a time to arrive, a time to take capsules, a reference to protecting metal, and then the words that would stay attached to the case long after the official answers ran out. A wait signal, mask. The 2 men were Manuel Pereira de Cruz and Miguel José Viana, electronics technicians from Campos dos Goitacazes in the state of Rio de Janeiro. They were not simply figures in a mystery. They were working men with families, skills, and a reason, at least at first, to travel. On August 17th, they left home saying they were going to buy equipment or handle business connected to their work. They carried money. They traveled toward Niterói. Along the way, according to reports, they visited shops, bought raincoats, and purchased water near the hill where they would later be found. At first, the trip could still be explained as ordinary business. But ordinary business does not usually end with 2 men on a hill, wearing lead masks, waiting for a signal no one else could hear. On August 17, 1966, Manuel Pereira de Cruz and Miguel José Viana left Campos dos Goitacazes and traveled toward Niterói. To their families, the trip appeared to have a practical purpose. According to reports, they said they were going to buy materials, a vehicle, or equipment connected to their work. They were electronics technicians, and nothing about that explanation sounded impossible at first. They carried money, left home, and began a journey that could still be understood as ordinary business. But once they arrived in Niterói, the trail began to take on a different shape. The 2 men reportedly visited an electronics-related shop. After that, they bought raincoats. Then they purchased a bottle of water near Morro do Vintém, the hill where their bodies would later be discovered. One account from a worker at the water shop described Miguel as nervous, repeatedly checking his watch, as if the timing mattered. That detail is not proof of what happened, but it is difficult to ignore, because from that point forward, the case begins to feel less like 2 men simply wandering into danger, and more like 2 men following a plan. Sometime after those purchases, Manuel and Miguel are believed to have gone up Morro do Vintém. The exact timeline becomes unclear after that. There is no confirmed witness who can describe their final moments. No one can say with certainty who met them, what they expected to happen, or whether anyone else was with them on the hill. What is known is that they were later found lying side by side. The person often described in accounts as discovering them was a young boy flying a kite. When authorities reached the scene, they found the 2 men dressed in suits, wearing raincoats, with lead masks shaped to cover the eyes. Nearby were the bottle of water, a wet towel, and the small note that would come to define the entire case. The scene did not feel random. It looked arranged. But arranged for what? No one could say. The note was short, but it changed everything. It suggested that the men had not simply arrived on the hill. They had followed instructions. According to versions later reported in Brazilian media, the note included times and commands. Arrive at the location at 4:30. Take capsules at 6:30. Protect metals. Await signal. Mask. It did not read like a farewell letter. It did not explain who had written it. It did not say what the capsules were, what the metal needed protection from, or what kind of signal they were waiting for. And at the center of those instructions was one word investigators could never fully explain: signal. That word is part of what pulled the case into decades of speculation. Because signal can mean many things. It could suggest a technical experiment. It could suggest a spiritual ritual. It could suggest a belief in contact with something beyond ordinary experience. It could also mean something far more personal, known only to the men themselves. But what it does not do is prove a UFO encounter. The lead masks also became a symbol of the mystery. They were crude, unusual, and clearly prepared in advance. Some later theories suggested the men believed they needed to protect their eyes from a powerful light. Others connected the masks to spiritual or experimental practices. But again, the masks show preparation, not certainty. To understand the note, investigators had to look beyond the hill, into the men's lives, their interests, and the possibility that this was not a crime scene in the usual sense. At the scene, there were no obvious signs of violence reported in common accounts. No clear evidence of a fight, no weapon that explained their deaths. The objects around them suggested planning, but not motive. Then came the autopsy problem. The official cause of death was never clearly determined. According to later reporting, the examination was delayed, and by the time toxicology could have answered the most important question, the condition of the bodies made reliable testing impossible. That meant one of the central theories, that the men had taken some kind of capsule or substance, could not be confirmed or ruled out. That gap shaped the entire legacy of the case. If investigators had known what the capsules contained, if they were taken at all, the story might have narrowed. It might have become an accidental poisoning, a failed ritual, a dangerous experiment, or something criminal. But without that answer, every theory remained partly suspended. Reports later connected Manuel and Miguel to interests in spiritual experiments, unusual scientific ideas, and possible attempts to communicate with other realms or beings. Some media accounts also mentioned witnesses who claimed to have seen strange lights in the area. These details helped push the case into UFO culture and paranormal speculation. But strange interests and strange lights are not the same as proof. What can be said with more confidence is simpler and more troubling. Two electronics technicians traveled to Niterói, bought items that seemed connected to a planned action, went up a hill, and died there under circumstances no one could fully explain. The note suggested timing. The masks suggested expectation. The missing toxicology left the cause of death unresolved. No one was convicted. No clear criminal conclusion was established. No official answer fully explained who wrote the instructions, what the capsules were, or what signal the men believed they were waiting for. For their families, that meant the mystery was not just a legend, it was an absence. Two men left home with a reason, and what came back was not an explanation, but a collection of objects people would argue over for decades. The investigation ended without a clear answer, but the hill did not become quiet. It became a place where every missing detail turned into a theory. What makes the lead masks case so difficult to forget is not that the scene was loud or violent, but that it appeared so deliberately quiet. The suits, the raincoats, the masks, and the note all suggest preparation. But preparation is not the same as explanation. The men seemed to be following a plan, yet the purpose of that plan was never recovered. The word signal became the center of the mystery because it makes the entire event feel intentional. It suggests they were waiting for something, a moment, a response, a sign, or an outcome they believed would arrive. But without knowing what the capsules contained, if they were taken at all, who wrote the instructions, or what the men expected to happen on that hill, the note remains less like an answer than a door left half open. The easiest version of the story is to turn Manuel Pereira da Cruz and Miguel José Viana into symbols of a strange legend, but behind the masks were two real men whose families were left without a clear cause of death and without a final answer. More than half a century later, the note still reads less like an answer and more like the beginning of one. They went to the hill waiting for a signal. The signal, if it ever came, was not one the world could understand. Across all three cases, the most disturbing part is not just where these people were last seen, it is how ordinary each place seemed, at least at first. A lighthouse built for safety, a planned night flight across familiar waters, a hill reached after a trip that could still be explained as business. None of these places looked, in the beginning, like the edge of a mystery, but in each story, One small detail changed everything. A missing light, a final radio question, a note telling two men to wait for a signal. These details did not give investigators complete answers. They did something more unsettling. They marked the point where routine stopped making sense. That may be why these stories stay with us. They remind us that mystery often begins in the gap between a warning and the moment someone finally understands what it means. Sometimes the system responds too late. Sometimes the evidence is lost to the sea, the sky, or time. And sometimes, when facts are incomplete, people build legends around the empty space. But legends can also make us forget the human center of these cases. The men at Flannan Isles were not just part of a ghost story. Frederick Valentich was not just a voice in a strange transcript. Manuel Pereira de Cruz and Miguel Jose Viana were not just two figures behind lead masks. They were real people who entered places that seemed to hold an answer and never came back to explain what they saw, believed, feared, or misunderstood. The creepiest places people were last seen are not always abandoned houses or dark roads. Sometimes they are workplaces, flight paths, hillsides, and ordinary routes that only become frightening afterward. Because once someone disappears, a place changes. It stops being just a location. It becomes the last known point between what can be proven and what may never be known. And in all three stories, that is where the silence begins. If you want more carefully told mysteries like this, consider subscribing. And as always, thank you for watching.
This file may be closed, but the truth is always out there. What do you think really happened? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to follow the next case. I'm Detective Frost, and this is the Cold Files.